Hello students, today we are going to study about the working of the heart as this is the continuation of the previous PowerPoint presentation in which we learned about the structure of the heart. So first let us recapitulate what we had learned in that chapter. So here if you remember this figure of the internal structure of the heart, we learned about the chambers of the heart. There are two auricles, right atrium and left atrium, and two ventricles, right ventricle and the left ventricle. And we also learned the blood vessels entering the heart like this: to superior vena cava and inferior vena cava and pulmonary veins. You can see from the arrows that shows that these blood vessels entering into the right atrium and the left atrium respectively, and the blood vessels leaving the heart are the pulmonary artery and aorta. You can see here pulmonary artery arising from the right ventricle and aorta from the left ventricle. Okay. Now, after we see these blood vessels entering and leaving the heart, we now come to the valves present in the heart. Between the auricle and the ventricles, there is atrioventricular valve. On the right hand side, between the right atrium and the right ventricle, is the tricuspid valve, and on the left hand side, between the left atrium and the left ventricle, is the mitral or the bicuspid valve. Okay, so this is about the chambers, blood vessels entering and leaving. And in the previous PowerPoint presentation, also I told you about the muscles of the heart, of the how they are unequally thickened in the four chambers of the heart, unequal thickening of the heart muscles. And also you know that the heart muscles are made up of cardiac muscles. So first we will go to the musculature of the heart. So it is made up of cardiac muscles. As you know, it is the third category of muscle tissue, and it is branched, striated, so that it works untiringly. It also contains myofibrils, which is independent from the control of both nervous system and hormone system. So these cardiac muscles also contain another tissue fiber which is uh, free from the nervous system and hormone system control. So this cardiac muscles of the heart is characterized by the capacity to contract and relax rhythmically in response to self-generated impulses. Okay. Now the wall of the heart muscle has three layers: epicardium, myocardium, and endocardium. The function of the or the structure and location and function of the epicardium. This epicardium is the outermost epidermal layer, provides protection to the inner tissues. Myocardium is the middle layer, which is made up of myofibrils that contract and relax on their own without the outside nervous stimulation. So this type of fibers, the myofibrils, they generate and transmit impulses. Like I told you, the second part of the cardiac muscles. Okay, the second type of tissue. Then the endocardium is the innermost layer of the heart, which gives rise to capillary muscle. So it's the inner layer of the heart. Okay. Now let's see what triggers the heartbeat, or how the pumping of the heart starts and who starts it. As we said, it is self-generated from the muscles of the heart. These heart muscles self-generate this impulse. So this impulse or command of the heartbeat is controlled by the special myofibril or conducting fibers. And these conducting fibers are located at two places: SAN and AVN. Now, SAN is sinoatrial node, or its biological named as, or other name is pacemaker. Now, this pacemaker is located in the upper posterior wall. This is the wall of the upper posterior wall of the right auricle, not in the cavity but in the wall, just below the opening of the superior vena cava. And this synovial node or SAN initiates the heartbeat, right? Well, it causes or starts or can say triggers. It triggers an impulse that causes both the arteries to contract, and this contraction is carried to the AVN. When the auricles walls contract, they stimulate the AVN or atrioventricular node, which is known as base setter. It is located near the interauricular ventricular septum. You can see the position of AVN. Okay, and it triggers the impulse that causes both the ventricles to contract. So first the auricles contract together, then both the ventricles contract together, and these impulses that triggers from these two nodes are carried by these fibers, which are connected through the muscles or the musculature of the ventricles. Okay, so it contains the fibers, which is known as bundle of His, and they constitute the Purkinje fibers that arise from the AVN, passes through the interventricular septum, and reaches the tip of the ventricles, from where again it goes upward or passes through the walls of the ventricles, both right and left, and from the bottom or the base it goes towards the upper part. So it contracts from the base or the ventricles, as a result of which it pumps or squeezes out all the blood of the ventricles into the respective blood vessels that leave their ventricles. Okay, so this is how the impulse is triggered or the heartbeat starts. The SAN or pacemaker initiates the heartbeat, and the AVN so is a pace setter, and that causes both the ventricles to contract through the Purkinje fibers. The impulse is transmitted. Okay. Now next we will see the circulation of blood. Now let's see how the circulation of blood is occurring. Okay. Now look here. In this, the here the right auricle is receiving blood, okay, from all over the body through superior and inferior vena cava, okay, into the right atrium. So the blood enters the upper right chamber, or that is your right atrium. Then the blood enters into the from the auricle when the both the auricles contract. When the both the auricles contract, the blood enters into the ventricles, and from the ventricles the blood passes from the ventricle to the lungs or pulmonary arteries to be carried to the lungs where the blood gets oxygenated. Okay. Now, after the blood is purified or oxygenated, it comes back through the pulmonary veins into the left atrium. And from the left atrium, the blood enters into the left ventricle. Okay. So, next, as the blood through the pulmonary veins reaches the left atrium, it pumps or pushes the blood to the left ventricle. And from the left ventricle, the oxygenated blood, okay, is carried through the aorta to the different parts of the body so that it supplies oxygenated blood to the all over the body to the living cells. Right? So this is the circulation of blood. Now we can see the blood is passing through the heart twice. Blood is passing through the heart twice before it's completing one full circuit. So this is the complete circulation of blood in the heart. Okay. Now let's see how the blood passes through this, or twice it flows through the heart. Okay, which is known as double circulation. The blood moves in a circuitry of blood vessels in the human body, which flows through the heart twice to complete one full circulation, and this is known as double circulation which includes pulmonary circulation and systemic circulation. Pulmonary circulation is the circulation between the heart and the lungs. It pertains to the lungs and heart. So you can see here from the right ventricle, the pulmonary artery is carrying deoxygenated blood to the lungs, where the blood is getting oxygenated and is carried back into the heart through pulmonary veins to the left atrium or left auricle. Right? So this completes one full circuit of pulmonary circulation. The other pertains to the major circulation between the heart and the rest of the body. So it's between the heart and the body, which is known as systemic circulation. And in systemic circulation, you can see over here the oxygenated blood from the left ventricle through the aorta, it's carried to the different parts of the body. See, it's branching out, forming capillaries at the tissue and cellular level. And then the deoxygenated blood, which is collected from the cells and tissues, is carried by the vena cava back to the right auricle or right atrium so that it can be taken to the lungs for oxygenation. So this completes the second circuit, which is known as systemic circulation, and thus this explains that it is explains double circulation. Now, after that, let's see how the circulation or the contraction and relaxation of these uh, chambers of the heart occur. Both the chambers, now you have understood that both the chambers contract together, that is, both the auricles contract together and relax together, both the ventricles contract and relax together, which is known as the contraction phase as the systole and the relaxation phase is known as diastole. Now let us understand this whole sequence of the events, systole and diastole, and a joint diastole, where all the chambers of the heart are in a relaxed phase. And this is known as cardiac cycle the heartbeat. Okay. Now let us first see when both the auricles are contracting together, we call it as atrial systole. When the atrial systole is occurring, the ventricular diastole takes place. Now what change or occurrence or event you see over here during atrial systole or ventricular diastole? Here we see the auricular walls are contracting, whereas the ventricular walls are relaxing. So we call it as ventricular diastole as well simultaneously. So when ventricular diastole is occurring, the volume of the chambers is increased. So the pressure is lowered, as a result of which, due to the contraction of the auricular walls, the blood is pushed into the ventricles, their respective ventricles, from right and left atrium into the right ventricle and left ventricle respectively through tricuspid and bicuspid valve. That means we can see here these cuspid valves are open. But when this is being filled up, the pressure is lowered. So there will be a tendency of the blood to flow downward from the respective blood vessels that is leaving the ventricles. So what happens? The pulmonary and the aortic semilunar valves close so that the blood doesn't come back to the ventricles. Okay, backflow. So the backflow is stopped. All right, it takes about zero point 0.1 second. Then the next phase, which is a more powerful systolic contraction, that is ventricular systole and diastole. Atrial diastole, ventricular systole. When ventricular systole is occurring, that means both the chambers of the ventricles are contracting together. When the walls are contracting, they exert pressure on the contained blood. So the pulpillary muscles of the ventricular walls that are connected to the cauda tendineae, which you already know, pulls the valves. Which valves? The cuspid valves, that is tricuspid and bicuspid valves. So they close with a jerk or with a loud sound. And this prevents the overturning of the flaps or the blood from going back or flow back into the auricles, their respective auricles, and because there is pressure on the contained blood, they are forced to leave the ventricles through the blood vessels that leave their respective ventricles. Through pulmonary artery from the right ventricle and to the aorta from the left ventricle. Okay, but when they are pushed, you can see both the semilunar valves, pulmonary and aortic semilunar valves, remain open. So, what are the events that are occurring during ventricular systole? One, the ventricular walls are contracting, auricular walls are relaxed, the tricuspid and bicuspid valves close with a jerk or with a loud sound, and that sound is known as lub. That is the sound produced during ventricular systole. The pulmonary semilunar valve and aortic semilunar valves remain open. But during arterial systole or ventricular diastole, what are the events that are occurring, which I told you earlier? The two auricular walls are contracting, ventricular walls are relaxed. But the tricuspid and bicuspid valves remain open, whereas the semilunar valves, that is aortic semilunar valve and pulmonary semilunar valves, close with a jerk, which provides or gives a softer sound, which is known as dub. So, lub and dub occur in sequence. And when the ventricular walls started to relax, we come to the ventricular diastole starts, and the arterial diastole is still continuing. It hasn't contracted, and this phase is known as joint diastole. Okay, atrial and ventricular diastole or joint diastole, which is about zero point 0.4 seconds. So these events that occur during ventricular systole and ventricular diastole or ventricular systole, which is also known as atrial diastole, and ventricular diastole or atrial systole, and the joint diastole, the time taken, that comprises of the cardiac cycle or heartbeat. So this is how the systole and diastolic phase of the heart take place in a cyclic manner. So that explains the working of the heart. Okay, let's stop here. Thank you. Have a good day.